All right, I want to pick up where we left off. Dr. Paul, you and I were, having a discussion about what you were hearing and witnessing firsthand, families that were coming into emergency rooms who had severely injured their children, and we ended
Due to the lockdowns.
due to the lockdowns. We ended that video abruptly because I can imagine it's very emotional for you. So let's jump back into that conversation and tell us what that was like.
Well, first of all, let me apologize to that we were talking about the edit out when I left. The listener needs to understand.
We decided we didn't.
Right. So made the executive decision that we will not, and I agree. And the thing is that people like Dr. Scott Atlas, myself, Peter Navarro, we were working in a very high charge thing. Michael Caputo. I mean, we were basically the vanguards. People don't understand. There were a lot of people running around in the pandemic and didn't know what the hell they were doing. A lot of them were there for jobs, appointees and stuff, and a lot of them were not even faithful or loyal to President Trump. They were backstabbing him and undercutting him. And he was dealing with CDC, NIH, NIAID, FDA, HHS. Even Alex Azar, who was the secretary of HHS, I had serious issues with how he was administrating the overall response. And all of the agencies reported under the umbrella. So I apologize walking out because I was a little overcome dealing with this again. The bottom line is we had parents, mothers and fathers with a child, 8 years old, 9 years old, unresponsive in their arms, holding the child, telling the doctor, the ER doctor, we beat each other today, but today we think we might have killed the child. And the child is there unresponsive, broken bones, and they're asking the doctor to help them save the child. And that's what we had across America, and that's the legacy of COVID and what Fauci and Bergson they did to Trump. Because really and truly, if there's one message I want is the lockdowns were really Fauci and Bergson's lockdowns. And they really misled President Trump. And there were many different ways he was screwed with this Operation Warp Speed. Overall, the mRNA vaccines, I always ascribe it to Robert Malone, Stefan Bancel, Albert Bourla, Uga Sahin from BioNTech, Drew Weissman, mRNA technology, Caitlin Carrico, mRNA technology, this whole Malone, Bourla, Bancel, this whole crew. And look, Americans need to understand in the world that when we locked down, we hurt children. What Fauci and they did on Bergs when they did the 2 weeks to bend the curve, knowing they were lying to President Trump, the longer they responded when we were getting data, and Atlas, myself, I mean, I was in epic wars with NIH, NIAID on the inside. I mean, the CDC and CDC, they were leaking my communications internally because I was talking about natural immunity and herd immunity and no vaccines, and that opened the place, end the lockdowns, the school closures were hurting children, the masks were garbage, they never worked and you could never use one of these masks for respiratory type pathogen. Especially, you could never end this pandemic. You could have never ended whatever it was, or any pandemic. Let's pretend that COVID was not a fake pandemic. I always have argued that we never even had a pandemic, but let's pretend. As long as there's an animal reservoir, and the reservoir for coronavirus or bat coronaviruses in those caves, wherever, plus you took it into the lab, as long as you have a foci, a reservoir, you can't end it. Smallpox, as an example, the population should understand. The only reservoir was human beings, remained so. That is why when we inoculated the world, we were able to tame it and tamp it down and end it, because we inoculated every human being. The point I'm making is, you can't end a respiratory pathogen when you have open borders, as we have, and an animal reservoir. It will never happen, especially if the pathogen has breached borders. Once it enters into the society, it's done. It's a matter then of containment and control. It's no longer stopping. So that's number one. Number two, when we close schools in America, children starved. What a lot of people, what those faceless technocrats and bureaucrats at CDC and the teachers' unions particularly, and the NIH and FDA, and the government, the congressmen and the Senate men and women who...
Let me stop you there, because you mentioned the teachers' union. And it seemed to me that the teachers' union, the head of the teachers' union, Randy Weingarten, was very much cheering on the continual closures of the schools, which was extremely detrimental, if not deadly in some cases. And I'm going to let you pick it up from there.
Well, I mean, what Mayor Deb is saying was catastrophic, and she's actually 100% correct. And we were getting all of the information. The thing is, in America, most children, even the wealthier children, they want to eat with their friends. They don't have the time in the morning when they break out of the house to run for the bus or however they get to school. They don't eat breakfast. And they eat the school lunch. And most poor kids, marginalized kids, minority kids, in fact, most American kids get their only meal, their substantive meal, in school during the school year. And when we close schools, millions of our American children, especially poor children, starved for months, if not over a year at times. But the rich people, what we call Kuldorf, Bhattacharya, Sunitra Gupta, myself, Dr. Atlas, we coined this term the laptop class, or the Zoom class of people, the cafe latte class. These are the more affluent people in society, the middle managers, senior management, who could have gotten the opportunity to work from home, to Zoom. These people paid no attention to what was going on to the children who were locked away with them at home. When you close schools, and a lot of them, the rich people could afford, they could have Amazon out or Uber out for the entire day. Lockdowns were a boon, was a pleasure to the rich and the affluent in our societies. They got richer. But think about it. They could catch up on reading some books. They were angry when we began to open up eventually after a few years. They could walk their dogs when they wanted. They could do whatever they wanted, go on vacations, you didn't even know. So it was the poor class, the blue collar worker, the bus drivers, the factory worker, who President Trump and the task force came to the podium to ask the trucker, the Canadian, the US trucker, to keep the supply chains going, which they did valiantly, but they had to front face whatever this was.
So, yes. And, when I look back to that time and having children who were...
You're talking about in your city, where you were mayor.
In my village, yes. The village, the town, the state.
This is in New York.
In New York State, yes. Seeing firsthand and experiencing what all of a sudden having children learning through remote means via a 45-minute Zoom class for the entire day, and then being expected to go through the material on their own, and the isolation from their friends. It was very troubling, and I can only imagine that if you were a child who didn't have a strong family unit that you could lean on during that time, that anything that I experienced or my children experienced had to only have been amplified in a negative way if you wouldn't have that support system or that support network of individuals around you outside of the school. And I think that was what had a snowball effect and continued to roll down the hill and get bigger and bigger as it went, for many of those children.
Well, I agree with you, and we're seeing it today. And I want to talk, and maybe if not this one, in a subsequent presentation about the Tops shooting, where that guy shot up the Tops grocery store in Buffalo and killed 10 people. You know, he's a white teenager, 10 people were black, they have a racist component. And he did say in his manifesto, but I want to talk about it, tying it to the lockdowns in school closures, because he said so in his manifesto. But I want to go back to something. You see, President Trump, I was there. President Trump fought hard. He fought Fauci and Birx and they behind the scenes hard. He fought the teachers' unions. But remember, Trump was facing academia, Hollywood, Democrats, the deep state cabal, the administrative deep state that I was confronting. He was confronting rhinos, other Republicans in the House and the Senate. He was confronting belligerent governors. He was confronting every single person who was conspiring against him. He was confronting CDC, the head of CDC, all of the top-down people, NIH, NIAID, FDA, HHS. They conspired against President Trump. I have argued in my book, Presidential Takedown, to topple him. And I give him a lot of credit. And I've never blamed him. My acrimony with Trump today, and I am on the Trump train. I mean, when we got introduced into meetings, people would say, you know, President Trump, this guy here, Dr. Alexander, when people, I chuckled every time. They would say, if you call him at 3 o'clock in the morning in Washington and say, come and bring your lawnmower to cut the White House lawn, he will do it for you. I supported Trump because I saw what he did for colored people, for minorities. You know, I have black ancestry. I understand I grew up in a poor situation in the islands, but I saw what he was doing. He really tried and he did help. President Trump did in 1 year, his third year, more for black and colored Americans and minorities than President Obama did in 8 years, Biden and Obama. And more than what Biden and Harris did in therefore, President Trump in 1 year, because the first 2 years Paul Ryan destroyed and the last year was COVID. So I need to say that. But what Mayor Deb is saying is something, there's another dimension with closing schools. And this Randy Weingarten, I mean, I have said I have a list I call the horsemen of the COVID apocalypse. You know, the 4 horsemen. My list right now is at 115, and she's on that list. People that I want to sit in a proper legal tribunal to answer questions under oath for what they did, what they knew, when they knew. And these people must be tried. And if courts and juries and judges say they're innocent, set them free. Let them live, collect their pensions and enjoy their life. But if it is shown that they costed lives deliberately, recklessly, because you could commit murder, first degree, second degree, all sorts of types of capital crimes by recklessness, and you are held to account also. There is accountability. If so, they must be. We need to strip them. We need to clean them out financially. We need to take every penny from the entire families, from everything. We need to put them in prison too if the judge says prison. And if the judge says additional penalties, we let the judge and the courts make the decision.
Okay, but let me stop you there, because I hear what you're saying.
And I'm angry.
And I'm sure many of the viewers will agree with you. But in order for there to be any accountability going forward, we have a presidential election coming up on November 5th. And we need somebody, either one of the candidates now, to have an open discussion about Operation Warp Speed.
And they're not.
And they're not having that discussion.
No.
And not only that, but I think the biggest problem that I have with the Operation Warp Speed was that eventually the vaccine became mandated. And I want to hear from both of the presidential candidates right now, if we face another pandemic, will you
and Robert Kennedy.
And Robert
Kennedy Jr.
Yes, and RFK Jr. As well. Will you support a vaccine mandate? Where do you stand on that issue? Because I think that when I hear people discussing COVID still, their biggest problem with it was that it got to the point where there was a vaccine mandate that was involved. So there was no longer this freedom to go on with your life and make a decision, your body, your choice type of decision. And I want to hear from those presidential candidates what their policy is going to be should we be faced with that again.
Well, so this, I think you hit the nail on the head, because in that, what Mayor Deb is saying is the issue about consent. There's nobody in this world who's ever given proper consent who've taken this vaccine, this Malone, Bula, Bansal mRNA vaccine, even the DNA viral vector platform, even that one. Because for you to give informed consent, you have to be explained the benefits of alternative courses of action plus the harms. And you need to weigh the benefits versus the risks, the upsides versus downsides, and you to come to informed decision making. That's what informed consent means. Nobody has ever gotten that. So that's number one. Number two, something I want to go back to. When we close schools, many children in America, you see what people didn't understand, these faceless technocrats, is that the school setting is the first place that physical abuse and sexual abuse is flagged for the first time. And we depend on schools. They see it and they know when something is wrong. Often, children sadly, viciously are abused by people in their own homes. 80 to 90% of the abuse comes from in their own home. And often it's from people that the mother and father knows. When we close schools, school is often a place where children get sanctuary, where children get reprieve from often a difficult home situation. Many children were sexually abused when we closed schools and nobody knew about it, and it escaped detection. That is one of the legacies of the Fauci, Burks, Azar, Redfield, etc. lockdown, school closure, Randy Weingarten. They hurt children. I have looked at some social scientific research that says they model the data and suggest now that it will take the rest of the 21st century, so 80 more years, for where children were 5 years ago, for them to just get back to where they are. 80 more, the rest of the century. It has been so catastrophic. And again, I want to dovetail back to President Trump in trying to continue what Mayor Deb has just said. In that we had a president who, for all intents and purposes, everything that I know, and really and truly, Mayor Deb actually had her hands in the fire as a mayor of a city in New York, a village, whatever you call it, in this state of New York. I was the only scientist in Health and Human Services with my background, and my job was to inform my bosses up to Alex Azar and to the White House. So I saw things, and I am constrained by NDAs and confidentiality agreements, and our president needs executive privilege. So I can't just say any and everything. But I can tell you, President Trump fought like an animal. He fought them. You need to know you had Trump, me, Dr. Atlas, Peter Navarro, Michael Caputo on the inside fighting. But we couldn't beat this beast because it was large. It was overwhelming, and I think in some extent the swamp drained President Trump. And this is why his second time around, we want him to come now for accountability. We want justice and we want punishment because what was done hurt us almost irreparably.